Hi again, and welcome to the second session of the Be Inspired audio video podcast. I'm Burt Barron.
And I'm Lisa Anderson.
I'm so inspired by what we were able to accomplish in the first session of these that I cannot wait to get right to session number 2.
I couldn't wait to get here today because our guests this time, their stories are amazing and they're incredible. And really, we are the lucky ones to get to meet them, to get to hear their stories. And in this day and age, when everything seems so doom and gloom and there's so much animosity going on, you tend to forget that there are people out there who are really, not only are they inspiring, but they're going through life, they're beating all odds. And it's always the people that have the toughest time, I found, and I'm sure you have, that are the most gracious people, that are the most interesting people, and they definitely enrich our lives. So this to me is, I couldn't wait to get here today.
So whether we're welcoming you back or welcoming you to the first time to the Be Inspired podcast, it's an audio video podcast where we bring you real stories from folks just like you and I who share stories of love and loss and struggles and perseverance, as well as laughter and tears and overcoming adversity. Our guest this time around has taken a real life story and has put together a terrific book in sharing his story. It is great to welcome Patrick Callahan to this edition of Be Inspired. Patrick, welcome. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Burt, and thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Let's begin with the basics. Your story and how we got to the point where you put this down into a book that I have heard nothing but great things about.
Thank you. Well, in a nutshell, my story began 22 years ago at the age of 40. I thought I knew everything about myself, about my family, and I woke up one day and got the news from a long-lost relative that I was adopted at birth. And my parents were gone. I was an only child. They had both passed away. And I was left with this shocking news. And I had to decide what I wanted to do with it, whether I wanted to learn the truth about myself and my past, or if I just wanted to move on with my life with my wife and daughter. So I chose to research the story and find out everything I could about my parents' past and where I came from and who my birth mother was.
You know, thank you, by the way, for the book. I read it in 2 days. I needed a summer read, and I read it. It's a nice book. It's an easy read. It's interesting. It keeps you, hanging on. And I read the first half one day and the second half the other day. But you know what struck me is, first of all, I would have to know myself. I couldn't go through life not knowing, I don't think I could, my birth. Would you? Would it bother you, Burt?
Tremendously.
Yeah, I would have to go and do some research as well. But you always had a feeling something was just a little off, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire journey.
Yeah, and the way your aunts in the book, I was upset for you. And you took that very well, by the way. His aunts, they never really treated you like family. And I don't know, it bothered me that it wasn't your fault. And if they were going to treat you like that, why didn't anybody tell you before you were 40 that you were adopted?
Yeah, it was a big family secret that my parents wished to keep, and they made everyone swear never to tell me the truth because of what I came to find out about myself.
So tell us how you came to, you started researching, and where in your hometown, where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up at the shore in Wall Township.
Okay.
But I came from West Orange originally in Essex County. And I was born in Irvington. My parents and I lived in West Orange. I was an only child. And at the age of 5, we moved to Wall Township.
Okay. I
was 5. So I grew up at an idyllic lifestyle in a very rural setting. It was a wooded area at the time, and had my friends. And my parents were very to themselves and really didn't socialize with anyone. I had a large extended family on my father's side, the Callahans, and they would come for parties and we would go visit them. But my parents didn't have a lot of friends, and they pretty much stayed to themselves.
And he had a kind of a strained relationship with your dad. Why do you think that was?
It was kind of a love-hate relationship. He was very judgmental of me. And then he would treat me kind of cruelly sometimes. And then I guess he would feel bad, and then he would lavish me with gifts to try to make up for that.
Do you think it's because of the past?
Yeah, it's definitely because of the adoption,
Yeah.
which at the time I didn't know about.
Patrick, I think the first thing, putting myself in your situation, I think upon learning this news, I would just feel this instant disconnection from everything that I thought I knew was true, and every person who I believed was supposed to be who they were. And just the trust, I think, 40 years, decades of trust, I would just, all of a sudden would come to my mind would be, how long have I been lied to? Yeah. Why have I had to live with this? And can I believe anything these people ever say to me again? Did you feel like that at all? Like you were just sort of cast out on your own and you really you didn't belong and didn't fit in anywhere? Did those feelings kind of take over?
Yes, and I absolutely felt that way, exactly what you just said. Totally disconnected from everything. Everything I believed about myself and my heritage was out the window. My parents had lied to me and then both died. And, that was very hurtful because I would never have the resolve with them to,
Closure.
Closure, yes.
Right,
yes.
right. And your whole identity, really.
Yeah.
It's like, who am I?
Yeah, so I went to search for who I was after that. And as I started to look back on my life and I realized there were a lot of strange things that went on during my youth that now were starting to make sense to me. I never looked like my parents. So I asked my mother and I said, who do I look like? She goes, oh, you look like my father, but he left when I was 5 and we never saw him again. So that was a very convenient story to tell me.
Well, they had to, because as folks will find out, the past was pretty crazy.
Yes, it was very crazy.
What happened when you finally located your birth mother and father?
Yes, at first I went to my relatives, and they were very angry that I've discovered the secret. Very angry. And they wouldn't help me. They said they knew nothing. I was left on my own. So I went on a search, and I found a couple of remaining people that were still alive that my parents knew. And they started to tell me, piece together a story for me. Yeah. That I was adopted out of a hospital at 5 days old. They believe it was an illegal adoption. There was an attorney involved. A lot of money changed hands. So it was very intriguing and also very disturbing at the same time.
Yeah, he was kind of flaky.
Yeah, and I looked up this attorney who was still alive.
Yeah.
And I had my attorney call him, and he would not return his phone calls. So I called him on a Saturday morning. I called his office. I kind of took the chicken's way out. I called and was going to leave him a message and see if he called me back. I was halfway through the message. He picked the phone up and said, come up Friday night. I'll give you your papers, he told me.
Yeah. And by the way, throughout all of this, you took your wife and young daughter all the time back and forth. And your wife sounds like a gem. Yeah. She, even though you were driving yourself literally, to the brink of exhaustion and very upset about the whole thing, she understood that you needed to find out. So yes. It comes to be that you located your mother, and tell the folks about your mom.
I found her apartment, and she wouldn't come to the door. So I went to the local tavern, and somebody had her phone number, and they called her because she was a regular there. And she got on the phone with me, and she asked me 3 times, are you sure your parents didn't tell you anything about me? I said, no. I had to swear to her that they told me nothing. And she was very fearful. So I finally convinced her that I knew nothing about her. Nothing was told to me. And she invited me back to the apartment. And I'll never forget the first time I saw her. She was leaning up against the kitchen sink, drinking a beer and smoking a cigarette. And that was the introduction to my birth mother.
What did you feel like when you first saw her and spoke to her?
A sense of disappointment. And shortly thereafter, my wife Tina and I and our daughter Claire, who was an infant at the time, sat down with her. And she started to relate this story about all her children and in and out of foster care. And she was an alcoholic, and she had several men, and she had an ex-husband and had fathered all these children, and she'd given some up for adoption, to someone in the foster care. It was this whole crazy story. Wow. And we just kind of sat in awe And I've come to find out that the man that she named as my birth father lived up the block
From
from her.
her.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when I called him, he denied paternity.
Wow.
Yeah.
The book called Decades of Deception, and we talked to a lot of authors over the years, Patrick. Was it therapeutic to be able to tell the story where anybody could delve into it and share the experience? Was it an emotional sort of release for you? That's, I'm sure you had a lot of pent-up emotion. Was this the outlet you were looking for to kind of tell your story?
Yes, and it was very cathartic to write the book. And at first I wrote it in the first person, and I actually, as it happened, who was involved,
Yeah.
where it happened. And when I sent it to a few publishers and agents, they got back to me and said, this story is too liable. There's too much liability here. So I chose to novelize the book. I changed the names of everyone. I changed the locations, fictional towns. I just kept my immediate family the same, and wrote it that way. And by the time I finished, it was 2017. I'd started in 2000.
Wow.
So it was 17 years
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to
That's
come to that point.
well. What is it like for you now? Do you look, because you're not the type of guy, it seems to us, that holds on to anger.
No,
No.
I
I think I'd be a little, I'd be a little jaded, I think, in life.
I tried not to be. I tried to look at the positive side of everything, and it was therapeutic, as Bert said, where I learned the truth. I got my answers. I got to meet my mother for 6 months, and then I ended the relationship. And she didn't understand that, but I had to end it because it was becoming very toxic. Because then I started to learn the things that she did to my parents over the years. Yeah.
I have to just interrupt you for 1 second. The whole time you're talking to me, I'm trying to think of who you look like. It's Leslie Nielsen from
Wow.
Airplane. Does anybody ever tell you that?
No, I've been told
Surely
Mickey Mantle. I've been
surely
told.
they had to. No, really, you
That's
do.
a new one.
That's a compliment, though.
Well, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I see some Mickey Mantle in there, sure. Now that you
Yeah,
Put a
that
New York
too.
Yankees hat on.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
that too.
Other people, Patrick, that have life stories with some parallels to them. Have you encountered anybody else that has been through anything remotely close like this? I think about children who go through the foster children system and not really know who their real parents are, or family members. Have you encountered anybody else, and have you been able to inspire them at all?
Yes, people who have read my book had similar, maybe not as dramatic stories, but similar stories where there was a lot of pain and a lot of guilt attached to their adoption, a lot of secrecy. And, they were inspired by it. And I've talked to many people who gained, some positive feelings out of my book. And I also did a radio interview on WFAN in 2017 with Bob Salter, and I got a lot of reaction from that. A lot of people emailed and called me who were adopted
Yeah.
and had been through similar situations.
I think most children who were adopted have this innate need to find their birth parents. That's just, I would say some don't, some are,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean that you're perfectly happy with your adoptive parents. It's just a need to know your roots and where you came
I
from.
found it's very black and white. They either really want to know or they really don't want to know. There's no middle of the road. Some people are very adamant that they don't want to know.
Right.
Yeah.
More words of inspiration with Patrick Callahan, author of Decades of Deception, coming up on Be Inspired.
Freestyle Marketing. For all of your marketing and promotional needs, follow or direct message Wendy for great ideas and first-class customer service. Contact Wendy at freestylemarketing.com.
Moving is difficult. At Lowe's, it doesn't have to be. For all of your residential and commercial needs in Central New Jersey, contact Lowe's Moving Service at 732-775-4118. That's Lowe's.
IgA Nephropathy Foundation of America is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to finding a cure for IgA kidney disease. If you or someone you know was recently diagnosed, please visit IgAN.org or contact 732-770-7377.
Also, thanks to Chain Gang Pro Performance Clothing, a new local company focused on providing activewear for your active moments. Check out their story and line of products at chaingangpro.com or follow their journey on Instagram or Facebook by searching Chain Gang Pro.
We are back on Be Inspired with Patrick Callahan, this time around, author of Decades of Deception. We're going to have some information on how you can get your hands on this incredible, incredible story. Patrick, I'm curious to learn about interaction between your birth parents and the people who raised you. Any interaction between them, and what was that relationship like between those people?
Yes, there was an interaction, and it was a big part of the story that I uncovered. Basically, what I found out was that my parents had made a deal with my birth mother to sell me to her, and I'm sorry, to buy me from her. And my parents had an attorney who was a neighbor, and he drew up some false documents. When I went to Newark to research them, they didn't have anything, and the docket number was false. And I spoke to the family court judge, and he said, "Do you want to press charges against the attorney?" And I chose not to at that point. So I continued on. Then I came to learn that my birth mother stalked my parents for many years and extorted money from them for her silence. And we fled North Jersey to come to Wall Township. She found us and made friends with a neighbor of my parents and would go to that person's house and stalk us. And she tried to grab me off the school bus one day. But prior to all this happening, when I was a toddler, she did snatch me back, kidnapped me, and I was scalded in a hot shower and fell down a flight of stairs and was injured. I had dizzy spells for many years. I had a short circuit in the brain, as a neurologist called it.
Why did she scold you?
Well, I hoped it wasn't out of retribution or for more money. But the people who were there at the time told me that they think that she tried to bathe me when she was drunk and scalded me.
You even had death threats against you, and, when you were going back and forth. The story gets really crazy. I mean, it's very scary. You could have really lost your life, because years ago, some adoptions were shady. And it's not like they are now, where a lot of children were, sold on the black market. I hate to use that term because, like you said, she extorted money and all, but that's a pretty crazy thing to think about back in the day. And was there ever a time where you felt like, I can't really keep doing this, because you were run off the road and, people calling your house and all kinds of threats against you?
Yeah, I'd gotten a death threat from a retired police officer in that town. And I won't mention any names, but he called my home. And what happened was, at the very beginning of the story, my birth mother had some kind of a relationship with a police officer. And she was involved in prostitution. And there was a baby selling ring going on at the time.
Yeah.
And I was a product of that.
Oh, God.
So when I was researching my story, I'm thinking, this is all about me. Well, it was a bigger story, because there were many of such adoptions, and police officers in the town were involved in fathering these children.
Oh.
So if that word got out and people started snooping around, there'd be a lot of embarrassment for a lot of people who are probably grandfathers now.
So there's still people, walking around saying, gee, they really don't know who their birth parents are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I asked the police department up there to open an investigation, and they had a lot of retired officers come and told them to squash it, and they did.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't probe any further after that.
Intriguing, to say the least, right?
As a parent now, Patrick, this is another chapter and another phase of your life. To compare the two has to be just unbelievable. For now, the family that you have now, to know that there's legitimacy and stability and love in that family, that can never be replaced. Just to have a stable family life where there's trust and things, positive things are happening there. Talk about just a total night and day between the two. You almost look at your life in two different stages, two different phases. You have to. Absolutely. It was the first phase with my parents, and the phase at age 40 when I found out this story. And the sad thing about it was that it affected my relationship with my parents, because my father was very resentful of me
because of all that went on. And I think my adoptive mother had made this deal on her own and brought me home, and then here I was, and he had no choice in the matter. They had tried to illegally adopt years before, but my father was injured in the Second World War. He had shell shock, and he had a nervous condition where they were turned down by Catholic Charities and by the state adoption agencies.
And not only that, but your poor mom, all the stress of, the money being extorted and such, she has a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, she did, and she turned to prescription painkillers, and she was sick my whole life. From the day I was born, I always remember my mother being sick.
Yeah.
In and out of the hospitals, in and out of sanitariums. And she died when I was 22 years old. She was 51 of drug addiction.
They did the best they could, though, at the
Yes.
time with what they had.
Yes.
And they never probably expected this to happen.
No, and I think they dealt with it the best way they could.
Yeah.
And their family did not help. Nobody wanted to help. Nobody wanted to know. So we had one neighbor who was very kind to my parents, and she helped us as much as she could. And she's the one who told me about the scalding incident and that it actually happened because I have spinal and neck injuries that have fused over the years, which are very old, I was told. And I had, subsequent blackout spells through my teenage years and 20s.
Have you undergone any therapy or professional help, Patrick, as your life has kind of moved down this path?
Yes, I did. Probably 15 years ago, I went to see a couple of psychologists, and they worked me through it. And it was very helpful to me. And I was very accepting of learning everything and getting past it. And I did have a hypnosis session.
Yes, the past life regression.
Yes.
I'm afraid to do that. I'm afraid of because I don't remember anything from my childhood. For some reason, I block out a lot of things or just have a bad memory. But was that intense?
Very, and I remembered a lot of things that happened. And one of the recurring events was my birth mother approaching me on the lawn when I was little and approaching me when I was a young kid in Wall Township on the street, trying to get me into her car. All those things came out, and I remembered them.
That you had blocked out?
Yes.
See, I would probably go back and remember a horrible gym class that I had in Catholic school or something like that that I didn't want to remember. But that's scary. But I think it heals you in the end. Like you can only process what you know.
Yes, and I would think once I learned the truth and I got to the very end of the story, I was able to heal and carry on.
Yeah.
And my birth mother passed away 2 years ago, and she had tried to contact me a couple of more times, and I just had no interest in a relationship. As I learned the truth, I could not have any relationship with her.
She's toxic. Yeah.
Yes, and I have some half siblings that I've been in contact with on and off.
Yeah.
For anyone listening or watching this, Patrick, is there anything that people should look for? Any signs? What if someone feels that their story is similar to yours? Well, what kind of advice could you possibly give them?
My advice would be to try to process the information the best you can and try to accept what you've learned. Because some people tend to dwell on these things and they never get over it. And I went to a couple of adoption support groups, and I told my story. I let it out, and I listened to other people's stories, and I felt good and felt, I had accomplished what I wanted. What I came to learn is many of these people have been going to these support groups for years and telling the same story every week.
Yeah.
Over and over, and never getting over it. I think you have to accept it and
Move on
with your life.
Yeah. I know a few people, myself, friends of mine, who have discovered their birth parents. Some have been good reunions and some have been really disappointing. And you have to realize also it's the birth parents, in most cases, the birth mother, they go through, their own private hell because, they're wondering what if, today's my child's birthday, he's 35 years old. And so it's really tough. I think with the internet now as well, it's so, easy to find your birth parents. And
Yes, much easier now than it was.
Yeah, years ago, you were just kind of in the dark and at the mercy of the courts And now a lot of people have found their parents that way.
Yes, in the mid-1990s when I was researching, the internet was in its infancy for,
Right.
The average person.
Yeah.
So I had to go to people who had a computer and then were tied
Libraries,
in. And
yeah.
I had a couple of private investigators, and it added some humor to the book. So I had this one particular private investigator.
Yeah, he was crazy.
He was a buffoon, but he just was a comedy relief through the whole story. But
Yeah. My sister always told me I was adopted when I was little.
I used to drop that on my brother once
Did
in a
you
while.
see?
So he didn't deserve that, but
I didn't either. Yeah, you were left on a basket no, I wasn't. Yeah, on the porch because they're all D's, their first name, and I'm L, Lisa. So I bought the whole story. So
these home DNA kits, Patrick, these 23andMe and these genealogies where people can look back for generations. Should people pursue these and maybe not be afraid of what they might find out? Because it could be some telling information. And what's your take on those, by the way?
well, I believe you should. And I just got my results last week from 23andMe.
wow.
And it's everything I thought it was. I'm
So now you have-
43% Irish,
Okay.
36% Dutch French, which is on the paternal side, 10% Scandinavian. And one of my top DNA relatives is a nephew of my birth father.
Your birth father, we didn't even touch on that. We're talking about your mom. Was he alive when you met him, when you found out?
No, he passed away in 1980.
Oh, so-
Alcoholism.
okay.
And his heart gave out. He was only 52 years old. He was a police officer when she met him. He got in some trouble in a shooting. He was shot and had to resign from the force. But he was a bad egg. He was just always in trouble. But I looked just like him, which is
Really?
crazy. When I look at photographs I have of him,
He had other
striking.
children and you met them?
Yes, I have
okay.
other half siblings through him. Yeah.
Patrick, as we bring our program to a close, this story is worth telling. We would encourage people to read the story, Decades of Deception. How does someone go about purchasing a copy of the book? And if you could just share some final words of inspiration with us, please.
Well, you can go to Amazon.com and just look up the title, Decades of Deception, or my name, Patrick J. Callahan. And I have a website, www.decadesofdeception.com, and also a Facebook page. So you could find the book anywhere there. And there's some information about my story on the website.
Nice. And you encourage people to write to you in case they have questions about their birth or if they're struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look, forward to that. Anybody that contacts me, I do try to help them as much as I can.
It's nice.
I had a gentleman from New York who heard me on the radio in New York, and he is writing his own book. So he sent me his rough draft, and I gave him some pointers on what I thought, to
Nice.
help him along. And
Good. Paying it forward.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Raises
Very
some
nice.
interesting questions about who we are and who we think we are. Patrick, thank you so much for being on Be Inspired. It was great meeting you today.
Thank you. Pleasure, Bert, and pleasure to meet you, Lisa, too.
Thank
as well.
you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
I'm Bert Barron,
And I'm Lisa Anderson, I think.
and thank you for joining us on Be Inspired.
Next on Be Inspired.
Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a puddle of my own blood in the middle of the sidewalk. Apparently, I had a seizure, and I just went face first right into the sidewalk. Because it was the middle of the night, nobody found me at that point. I don't know how long exactly I was laying there. I just mustered up the strength to get myself back in the car and get help. Stumbled into the ER.
It must have been really tough for you. You had a little baby.
She was pregnant. It was kind of like oh crap for a second. I'm like, how am I gonna take care of a little
Yeah.
baby?
It's
just-
a display of courage
It really
that
is.
I
It
don't
just-
see very often.
Grade 4 glioblastoma, astrocytoma.
And there is no grade 5.
Join us next episode on Be Inspired.
Be Inspired is hosted by Bert Barron and Lisa Anderson. Director Rod Weber. Creator and producer Michael R. Doyle. Co-producers Rod Weber and Lisa Anderson. Executive producer Sean M. Sternberg. Personal assistant Carlo Anthony. Be Inspired is sponsored by IGA Nephropathy Kidney Foundation and Loeys Moving Service.